Hello everyone. Welcome to VSFF at Home, Craft and Connections. My name is Emily Weldon. I'm one of the festival co-directors of VSFF.
And my name is Nicolas Verona, festival co-director as well. I am really pleased calling you today from the unceded, shared traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, upon whose lands the Vancouver Short Film Festival operates. We're very grateful to hold our festival on these lands each year. I recognize and honor these unceded lands on which I'm privileged to live, work, and create. To learn more about whose ancestral lands on which you live, work, and maybe you're tuning in from as well, we invite you to learn more at native-land.ca.
Thanks, Nick. And thank you for sharing your time with us today, everyone who's joining, as we're getting comfortable, getting ready to explore the director-producer relationship. And I'm really excited for this conversation with these panelists. This event series is meant to stir conversation between Canadian filmmakers. VSF at Home was born as a series of ongoing informational and community-building events for our audiences to learn more about the craft and the industry of filmmaking. We're really proud to host these unique opportunities, all available online and free to the public. And we have so many people to thank who helped us make this event possible. So Nick, go ahead.
For sure. First of all, thank you for Creative BC for your ongoing support of the VSFF at Home event this series. You guys invest a lot in BC festivals and events like ours, and your commitment to the BC film industry is just huge. We'd like to especially mention Minister Lana Popham, BC Minister of Tourism, Art, Culture, and Sport. She couldn't be here today, though she'd like to send her greetings and send her best wishes for this event and everyone attending. We'd also like to extend special thank yous to VSFF sponsors who make all our events possible year after year. Telefilm Canada, William F. White's, Global BC, 980's CKNW Radio, Vancouver Sun, Keslow Camera, Gear-Based Camera Rentals, Circus HR, Carolina Turek Photography, Corgi Creative, and My Tribe Media. A full list of sponsors is available on vsff.com. Thank you to all our panelists for being here today. I can't wait to hear from everyone. This is going to be some amazing, insightful wisdom being delivered today. Of course, thank you to all our BSSF staff, volunteer staff who work around the clock across the year to bring all of these events to life. This festival would not be possible without them. We love you guys. Quick reminder that we have more events coming up in this series. We will have the craft of editing at 1:30 p.m. today. We will then also tomorrow have the planning your festival strategy at 10 a.m., same time as today. And then we'll end this panel series with a Keep It Short speed meeting at 1:30, so you can meet people all across BC and hopefully all of Canada, as well as ourselves. We will be on those speed meetings. Hopefully many of these panelists as well. Register via all of this online. Check out vsff.com/VSFF at home for all the details. Emily?
Of course. And there's one other big event that's coming up in June 2023 is when we're holding the Vancouver Short Film Festival this year. So launching on June 2nd, VSFF 2023 will run from June 2nd to 4th in person at the VIF Center and until June 11th online and available across Canada. Do you have a film that you want to showcase to your community? Nick, what do you think that people should do if they have a film that they want to show?
I mean, there's only one short film festival in town that matters. Okay.
We'd really be proud and we'd really love to show your work. So we'd love to see it. VSFF is accepting submissions now via Film Freeway now until February 10th. So you've got a little bit of time. If you still want to submit, check us out on filmfreeway.com/VSFF. And special for our at-home audiences, for those who are tuning in, submit now on a discount. So we have a discount code. It's at home VSFF. At home VSFF. At home VSFF. We'll put it in the comments in the YouTube as well. You get $5 off your submission. So please use that now until February 10th. We can't wait to see your work.
And now I'm going to introduce Avi Glancer, who will be the host for our panel today, and on with the show. Avi?
Thank you, and hello. I'm Avi Glanzer, the co-director of programming here at VSFF, and I'm excited to welcome you to the VSFF at Home Crafts and Connections panel series, We are about to begin our panel titled Exploring the Director and Producer Relationship. I would like to welcome our panelists.
Hello.
With us today, let me introduce Kristyn Stilling and Melanie Jones, director and producers of Shuttlecock, Death at a Party, and the upcoming feature Switchback. And let me introduce Mike Johnston and Asia Youngman, producer and director of Nahaha Itku. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
So for this panel, I have a list of questions about this director-producer relationship that we are all part of. And I'll be tossing things around between everybody, but feel free to jump in at any time. I'd like to just get some good discussions going. That's the goal for today. So let's begin. We're going to start with something really easy. How did you meet and start working together? Let's toss this to Mike and Asia first.
I was just trying to remember when we first met. Well, I know where, but do you remember when? Because I feel like in the pre-COVID era, everything just blends together. So I don't remember like what year it was. It was at the Whistler Film Festival. Well, we met briefly, but then we kind of got to know each other at Whistler, right?
I think it was 2019 because we made Hatha in 2020, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so 2019, we went to the Whistler Film Festival. We ended up like staying together with a bunch of friends, and our mutual friend Kayla Wachel was like, "You need to work with Mike. You need to like meet Mike," because Kayla shot Hatha, and we just met up and really clicked. And I feel like that project really resonated with Mike, which was great. And we got to work together, and we've been working with each other since.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, like I obviously at that time I knew who Asia was. I knew who she was, what she was doing, the films that she was making, and she was somebody that I was interested in working with. But I think Whistler was it was a great experience for us to get to know one another, and then we decided, yeah, okay, let's make a movie.
And same question to Melanie and Kristyn. How did you guys meet and start working together?
I just want to start by saying that me and Melanie are on the unceded territories of the Sartlet First Nations. We are not in the Lower Mainland at the moment, so we want to recognize that this is the land that we are on at this current time. But how did we meet?
Yeah,
I feel like we've never talked about this. I think I have a version, you have a version.
Probably. You go.
Melanie had a feature that played at the Whistler Film Festival where I was working at the time. And so I was a big fan of Melanie's work and visuals. They post a lot on social media, and I saw stuff that they were trying to develop and the visuals, and I was always really intrigued. And I felt like I had met Melanie a few times and kind of said like, oh, it'd be so fun at some time to collaborate. But like, it was just in a social situation, so that never is like a sticking thing. But it all kind of came to a head when Melanie had Shuttlecock, and they were looking for producers to add to that project.
Yeah, so our first like project together was Shuttlecock, which was a Crazy Eights film in 2018. But I remember, obviously I remember you from Whistler. You were the moderator for our Q&A at the screening. But I also, of course, I had heard about you and knew you were in the industry. And I remember we were both on the what was the web series thing that you were doing?
Oh, Vanchan?
Vanchan. I remember meeting you at Vanchan being like, kind of a little starstruck in the sense of like being like, I know this is like a person who is making things happen, and just being kind of excited by that. And so, yeah, when we got to collaborate on Shuttlecock, it was a very fun, like finally kind of coming together on something while, being in each other's orbit for a long time.
And my kind of unofficial interview for Shuttlecock was at holiday time, and we were trying to set up a meeting, and I was like, okay, we did it really early in the morning, I remember, because I said my office Christmas party is in the evening, so if we do it in the evening, I'll like be drunk, and that won't be good. But I showed up in like a full-on Christmas sweater, like one of those obnoxious Christmas sweaters to the interview. So...
It's one way to make an impression. So let's talk about the process of developing, completely new content. When you're working together, let's say, you guys have examples of being brought on a project you already were developing, but what does it look like to develop completely new content together as a pair? Let's go to Melanie and Kristyn first for this one.
I think, well, up to now, because I write a lot of my own project, like my own work, I often will like come to Kristyn with things and be like, so I'm working on this script or this idea. Like, what do you think? Is this a thing that you would want to partner with me on? Because I know that, to sing her praises a little more, Kristyn is in demand and lots of people want to work with her. And I know she has other projects on the go. And so, her slate is not always going to have time for like every single thing I want to do. But of course, every single thing I do, I want to work with her on. So I always kind of come to you, I think, with sort of like either like the kernel or some amount of developed stuff and kind of go like, what do you think? Is this a genre you're interested in? Is this a type of media you're interested in? Because I'm writing shorts, features, TV series, web series, and like not all of those are necessarily things that Kristyn wants to develop. So from my perspective, that's how I approach you with new content. Yeah.
Melanie is definitely the creative driving force. Like they are the writer and director. So it's all stuff that is coming out of Melanie's imagination. But I'm sure that this will be similar to most director-producer relationships. I really value directors that want my creative input and are want to work with me in that development stage and have someone to bounce ideas off and certain stamps of mine that end up in the project from that collaboration. It's very creatively fulfilling and I think valuable for the development of the project and the relationship.
Yeah, and I would just one last thing I would add is that Death of the Party was actually not something that I wrote. So some colleagues of ours came to me to hire me as a director, and I was like, can we bring on Kristyn, please? Just because I knew that like that was going to make the whole project more successful, and I spent a very long time in my life as a filmmaker producing my own work until I found Kristyn, and I'm just not going to let her go. So that's kind of my attitude about it, is like anytime I can bring Kristyn in on something, I will, whether I've created it, whether I'm being hired for something, because I know that she'll, elevate the project basically.
And same question to Mike and Asia. What does the process of developing completely new content look like for you guys?
Well, I think it's a very similar process to what Kristyn and Melanie said. Like the first project that Asia and I worked on was called Hatha, which was a short film that we made with the Harold Greenberg Fund in 2020 and was released in 2021. And Asia approached me with that project after we met at Whistler. That project was already semi-developed. She had written it. She had secured the majority of the financing at that point. So I kind of came in as more of like an execution element at that point, which I think was a good introduction in terms of working with us, in terms of us working together, I should say. But kind of building off of that, like I would echo, Asia is very much the creative driving force behind our relationship. And talking about a film like Naha'iku, like the famous story I like to tell is I got a text from Asia one night that was like, you don't have to do it, but I'm writing this film about the Naha'iku, and I'm like, I'm in. Like it didn't take me very long to agree to that one, because that was an easy hook for me. No matter what happened between then and finishing the film, is like that was an easy in for me. So it's very, very similar. I think we feel similarly, is like if I'm working on something where I'm looking to attach a director, Asia is one of the first people I look at. And we kind of have that symbiotic, I think, relationship where we support each other throughout the process, and it's worked well thus far.
Yeah, basically, I just like called Mike and I was like, so I know we said we're not going to do another short right away because like Mike and I have been trying to move into features, and I'm like, but I have this concept and like there's going to be like, we need some kids, we need to shoot on the water, there's going to be boats, there's going to be like effects elements, like stunts, like what do you think? And he's like, sure, I'm in. So the great thing is Mike's never turned away from my like wildly ambitious ideas, which I always really appreciate. And it's just really great kind of just pitching ideas to him and kind of hearing his feedback. And, you know, he's a really trusted collaborator for me. And like Mike said, like I'm always trying to bring him on to like as many projects as I can, like similar to Kristyn and Melanie. It's like anytime that we can work together, I try to make it happen just because there's like that strong trust there. And I know Mike's like one of the hardest workers I've met and he'll always get something done. So yeah, just been really lucky to work together on multiple projects.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, shucks.
I want to jump on that and say I totally agree with you, Asia. Like pitching stuff to somebody that you trust when you're like, I don't know, is this a good, you know, but like if it's somebody you trust and you can pitch in that first, you know, inkling of an idea, it can be so valuable to like actually then developing that work into something and into something that can actually be shot and achieved, because they're you know, their producer's mind, but also like their belief in you can really like elevate that pitch, like right from jump, essentially. So I totally agree.
Absolutely.
So let's speak to that a little bit, because you know both of you pairs have discussed the idea that, you know, as these projects gestate with the director and then pitching to your producer. So what does it look like, the process of selecting one of those projects? You know, and maybe let's start with the producer speaking to this. Your director has presented you with a project. What makes you say yes? Is it just them, or is there something about the content of itself? Is it something you're looking for specifically? Let's start with Mike for this one.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's kind of twofold. It starts in two places. It starts with the people or the person, and then of course with the script. Like it's got to be something that I resonate with, or I have an interest in, or you know, or if it's something that I feel has been unrepresented or just hasn't been given a proper platform, I want to, you know, do what I can to elevate that content or that story. But it also comes down to, like, you know, you can have a great script, but at the end of the day, you know, we are, you know, in an execution business. Like, you can have great ideas, great stories, great scripts, but I need to know that the person behind that is going to be able to pull it off, or at least, you know, I have the faith in the person that I can, you know, surround them with the people they need to be able to help tell that story, right? So it is a team effort. Like, I don't want to make it sound like, you know, Asia's on her own. It's like, you know, good luck, you know, figure it out. But it's I think, you know, knowing how Asia and I work is like, even though, you know, when you're presented with a script that has water monsters, water effects, VFX at night, you know, all these things, you know, the only thing that could have made it more complicated would be fire and horses. But, you know, I think you look at that and you see a lot of complicated elements, but I think also knowing how Asia works as a director, I was confident that even though it would be a challenge for us, that we could navigate it. So it really, you know, not only does it come down to creative, it comes down to the person as well.
Kristyn, the question to you as well. You know, what makes you select the project once you've been pitched it?
Definitely. I think that's true. Like, if you've worked with someone before and you've had the honor of seeing like a body of work, you know their aesthetic style and you know what they're able to pull off. And so even if it's content that maybe is not like your particular favorite script, like, you have the trust that this visual storytelling, that their technique and their manner of framing it is going to be interesting and beautiful. That being said, I think for us particularly, it's just a matter of like what fits into the sphere of what we are actually able to do. You know, what can we apply for funding with? Where are we at in our career? And for example, Melanie's been developing a sci-fi TV series for a number of years, but we are not at the stage where anyone's going to give us a multi-million-dollar budget to make it. So it's probably going to sit on the back burner as a series, at least for now, until like we would get to the point where someone would be able to fund that. So at this point, and one of the things I like about our relationship is Melanie also does like to play. So sometimes it's like we have these big projects that we are very confident and believe in, but then also playing around with something smaller, something we might be able to just do on a weekend that like tests out a idea or a concept or a way of storytelling. And so that can also be a factor, just like what kind of works within the year and funding and whatnot.
And any other projects that you have
that's also
going on, because you work with other directors and you have other things, you know, in your sort of like slate, your schedule for the year, right?
Yeah.
So for the directors, what you've got a stable of ideas. Let's say what makes you choose one over the others to pitch to your producers? Like what is the baseline for that process? Let's start with Asia for this.
Kind of similar to what Kristyn's saying, like it is kind of a timing thing, I find. Like I think us as creators, especially freelance creators, like we always have so many projects kind of on the shelf, and it's just a matter of like which one gets picked up for development first. Sometimes it's a gut feeling, like kind of like Kristyn said, like Mike and I would love to do a feature version of Naha Yidku, but we want to do it with the right budget, with the right timing. So it's not something we're willing to rush. And we feel like, you know, there's other projects that we kind of want to pursue first, and just kind of build up those credits before we can do a more ambitious project like that. So I think sometimes it's a mixture of things, right? It's like which one can get picked up for development, which one feels like the right time, and all sorts of factors that play into it. So that's usually kind of how we make those decisions. But I'm always kind of looping Mike into like, hey, I have all these ideas, and we usually have a few things kind of on the go, and just a matter of which one goes first.
Yeah, sometimes it's just, you know, we might have 2 or 3 things that we're working on, but we don't know which one, and then, you know, the one that we weren't expecting to goes, right? And then but the one that we were hoping would go first, you know, takes a little bit more time. So in a way, I think as a producer, speaking as a producer, that's why I love having multiple things on the go, because it's always hard to predict how things are going to time out. Like you might want them to go one way, but you can't always you know, play your cards that way. So you can, it comes down to, like Asia's saying, like a gut feeling or just the right timing.
And Melanie, how do you choose? How do you choose from the projects to pitch and move forward with?
I think, I mean, timing is like absolutely a huge factor, because there's only so much development you can do on like your own dime and your own time. And then, you know, at a certain point, like you really do need to have some development funding or go to a lab or a workshop or something to like further, you know, sort of move that piece forward. And sometimes you hit a wall with developing it on your own as well. And so you just go, yeah, that one needs to go in the drawer for a little while. And I need to think about it a bit, you know, sort of in the subconscious. I tend to, I would say like my artistic process is that I tend to really follow like what is emotionally pulling me in at the moment. So sometimes I have projects like this sci-fi series project, like I love this project, but I've been working on it for 10 years. So it doesn't have maybe the same like spark of excitement as like a newer thing often will, because I've had it for so long, but I have a different emotional relationship with that project because I know it's kind of a long-term investment type of project. And so I've been trying, especially lately, I've been trying not to forget to continue to think about new things, because you can really get bogged down sometimes, I think, with stuff that like you've been developing for years, and it's really slow, and it's really hard to like maintain the like patience for like, when is it going to finally, you know, happen? And so one of the ways you balance that is by having like new ideas. And I think that's why I like to make like littler more playful thing, is like it's an opportunity to flex your muscle as a director, or just flex your muscle creatively while you're waiting for those big projects to go, and the sort of patience that's required for that kind of stuff. Yeah. Especially features or like big, you know, big budget stuff.
Mm-hmm. So you've made the step, you know, you've pitched this, you guys are both, you know, you've both said, hell yeah. do you start with a script or do you start on a script? Like, where does the idea begin or where does it move forward? Let's start with Melanie and Kristyn for this one.
What's your perspective on that? I feel like I often bring you stuff.
Melanie comes usually to me with stuff that's already been started. Like there's a script, but not always.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's a concept and the script is still being worked on. So I guess it just depends. Again, it also depends how long you've been working on something. Like if it's a brand new idea and Melanie wants to bounce it off of someone, or if it's something that I mean, all the projects you've been working on a long time, I'm already familiar with. So maybe it's like a new insight.
Yeah, I think probably the best example for us would be maybe like Shuttlecock was like a concept when you came on, because just because of the nature of Crazy Eights, you know, you're pitching like an idea essentially, and then if you advance, then you could further develop the idea like as you advance through the stages, like the shortlisting process. And that one, you know, I originally went to the lead actor in that piece, Rona Reese, with like, I have this idea that I think you would be perfect to play this character. Do you want to develop the character with me as I write the script, essentially? And then we ended up co-writing it, and then we brought on producing partners to then, you know, carry it through the Crazy Eights process. So that was a lot more like you had the opportunity to be more involved in that because it was earlier in the process. Yeah. And I think that was like, it was a new experience for me because I had developed so many things on my own for so long, and then brought them like, here's my fully formed child, please, you know, please love it as much as I do, as opposed to coming with like, I've just got this spark, and like, you're less precious, you're able to like swing in different ways a lot more, I think more flexibly, because they're part of the development process, and those are different ways of working. But at this point, like, I trust Kristyn with my children, so it's okay. But yeah, I think like the bringing like new ideas is still early in our relationship, is still earlier because I have way too many things on the, you know, in the drawer. That's the problem.
One of the great things about Melanie is that they are also like a visual artist, like a sculptor, an artist. So when Melanie's developing something, there's often a lot of imagery that comes with it that's really easy as a producer to get a good idea of what they're thinking, even if there's no script in terms of a visual style. Mm-hmm. Like I think for Shuttlecock, there was a mock-up poster before there was ever a script. And I just saw that poster and was like, oh, I get this story, even from like the log line in the poster. So that is a cool element of Melanie's process that is like fun as a producer.
And to Asia and Mike, do you start with the script or do you start on a script?
Do you want to take that one, Asia?
Okay. I guess with Nahai Idku, like it was a concept first, and then I wrote the script, and then we kind of created the pitch deck from there. So it kind of varies on the project, whether it's like a doc or whether it's narrative. And then we're currently working on a feature narrative. I was supposed to have the script done, but now I have to do the pitch deck instead, given our timing, because Mike and I are, my bad. Mike and I are going to Berlin for the European film market to pitch the project. And so we're putting together a pitch deck for that. But I should have the script done, or I should have, but that'll eventually happen. And with some of like the doc projects we've had, like, you know, they've been like a pitch deck, and for my feature doc, like Mike's come on as a co-producer. And then we're also working on a short hybrid doc currently, and that's basically been a pitch deck as well. So it kind of depends on the stage of the project, or like if there's a market coming up and like what we can achieve given the time that we have, or whether it's like documentary or narrative. It kind of just varies depending on what the project is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of goes back to that, you know, statement on timing a little bit too, where it's like, you know, using Nahai Idku as a case study again is like Asia kind of started writing that because we had a target that we were working towards in that case, which was the DGC Greenlight. But in something like, you know, the feature film that we're developing together, that, you know, we have a bit more, that's a slower process. Obviously, we know we have a bit more time. So instead of starting with the script, we're kind of, you know, starting with, you know, an outline and putting together a pitch deck and things like that. And the script will, you know, slowly gestate along that way. But it's kind of, it depends on the, like Asia said, not to get repetitive, but it really depends on the project and the timing.
All right, let's stay in development here for a bit. Let's talk about the division of labor. You know, like you've chosen to go forward with the project. How do you establish that division of labor, especially in a pair that is working so consistently across projects? Let's go back to Mike and Asia for this one.
Well, division of labor is very easy. Asia does everything, and I sit back and I wait for things to arrive. No, I mean, like Asia is the she is like kind of the creative head when it comes to this stuff. So like I think it's important that she has the time to, you know, kind of develop the script, and that largely stays within her column. And then once, you know, she has a draft or two, then it's like, you know, I'll come in with notes, and my notes can be both creative and then also, you know, logistic, in a sense of, you know, what is actually feasible with what we think our budget's going to be, or what our budget is in fact, what's feasible, you know, where could we shoot this, you know, like, are we eligible, are there tax credit, like do tax credits come into this equation? You know, that's the side that in terms of labor, those are the things I start to think about early in the development phase, is how can we, you know, maximize our production value, or how can we maximize our structure to make this happen. But I think it's also I think it's important, you know, I don't like to, like, I want to make sure always that whether it be Asia or another director has the space to, you know, write the story that they want to write. So I don't want to be too overbearing or too over involved early on. Like I want to give her the space to, you know, I always say, like, you know, write your big movie, like write what you want to write. And then, you know, if we have to pare it down from there, we will. But it's like, I don't want to ever put somebody in a box and say, you know, this is what we have to do, like do this, you know. It's like write your dream, and then I guess we'll slowly chip away at your dream and come more into reality.
Too real.
Super uplifting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, it's reality, folks. So yeah, I think it's important, like, that we're kind of like, you know, divided a little bit at that point, but then as we, you know, go deeper into the development process, those two sides of the equation start to, you know, line up more as we go along.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is that, like, even though I'm kind of the creative behind like these materials, like I'm always wanting Mike's feedback on things, and I always really trust his opinion on things. So I think what I really appreciate about our like working relationship is that there's so much like transparency and just like communication between us, and like we're always talking about budget, and like Mike's never kind of withholding any information from me. Which is something I haven't experienced with like every producer I've worked with, but I find like Mike's just very honest, and that's why I trust him so much. And we're always just kind of, you know, talking about like, okay, like where are we at? Like what's next? And like we're splitting like tasks up once in a while. So it's very kind of evenly weighted. And I feel like we're always kind of just keeping each other like in check and just updating each other like what's going on as well, which is great.
Yeah, and I think there's just there's a trust there too, that when which is like key, like trust and transparency are like, I think, key to a relationship like this really working. Because it's, you know, if I come to Asia and I say, listen, I know you wanted this whole like, you know, fight sequence on the water, but I think it's going to be a little tough. So
35 millimeter.
Yeah, shooting on film at night with kids. So, but then, you know, the reverse side of that is, I think, you know, Asia knows that I'm not, you know, for lack of a better word, I'm not, you know, hiding anything from, like, I'm not, you know, saying that to make life more difficult, or I'm not saying that because, you know, I'm trying to, you know, drive the film one way or something. That always comes from a place of honesty. And I think that's, you know, something that's helped our relationship, is like both of us know we can just be 100%, open. It's like, this is not going to work, or this is going to be a challenge, or what have you, because we all know that the resources that we work with in this indie film world can be limiting at times, but we try to do the best we can with what we have. But, you have to be able to have those open conversations and have that trust and transparency to really make it work.
Melanie and Kristyn, how do you establish division of labor?
I would like to roll with this theme that's we've touched on a few times, and Mike and Asia have just been diving into it, about trust, because when we were discussing what is it about a relationship, and it really does come down to trust. And the thing is it does have to be built. So it can't just be okay, we're working together, now you have to trust me. It's not going to work that way. But at the same, so but you have to put trust in someone for them to feel like they are also an important part and a collaborator. And so it's releasing that trust to that person, and then that person earns it by standing up to the trust you've put into them. And that just comes with time and working together. So the best collaborations are just, there's a lot of trust there, but it unfortunately just can't happen automatically.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this on the ferry over yesterday, and I was saying I don't mind sharing my dirty laundry a little bit about this. I had trust issues going into working with producers, because I had produced a lot of my own work, and I know that you are always having to deal with me a little bit on this, is that I tend to sort of try to produce my stuff just a little bit, and then Kristyn sort of has to say I'll take care of that. That's not a thing you need to worry about. And then I have to be right. Because it's kind of old habits partly, but also, because of early experiences where the relationship didn't pan out, and then you're sort of a little burned by that, or you're a little scarred by that. And it does, whether you want it to or not, it does affect how you walk into the next one. And so you're having to learn to trust. It's kind of like dating in a way, you have to learn to trust again in the next relationship. And in this case, I've been, very lucky in how things have turned out, and we have an excellent relationship, but I know that I still have my moments. And one perfect example, I'll give you an example because it's so funny. So we were submitting to something, and I basically always do the application because I have control issues. For whatever reason, when it was due, and I was working and I couldn't do it, and I had to be Kristyn, can you do it? Can you submit? And then I was is that okay? Oh God. And I had to sort of relax and be somebody else is going to do it, and it's going to be fine. And it was. And then after that, I think I've had way less of an issue of you having to do the paperwork, or me, or, whoever has to do it. It's I'm not as holding on to it as tightly, because my trust was, as you said, rewarded in the sense that it all worked out and it was fine. But it took me a little bit of time to get used to that. And we had another experience. We Switchback was selected for Frontiers this year for the market. And we spent 3 months practicing our pitch. We held practice pitch sessions. We brought people in, we got feedback. It was a very huge ordeal to put this pitch together. And then 2 days before the market, I got sick and I could not go. And for me to not go and pitch my baby that I have been working on for 5 years before I met Kristyn was painful. It was truly painful, but it was really eye-opening, because I was but I trust her. And our other producer, Eli Morris, also I trust them both to go and pitch. And that was a new experience for me to be able to be wow, I have grown for sure in this relationship, because I totally trust them to go and caretake our child, at this market, and be good caretakers and be good advocates for it. And also I felt like it was good for you to like own it a little bit more without me there, you know, like in a way. I thought that was
Well,
awesome.
we would have preferred to have you there, but
Sure.
we were able to make it work. Yeah.
Yeah, re-rehearsing the pitch the night before without me was probably not the funnest thing, but
Yeah, I think it's the goal of most producers. They want their director to be able to focus on the creative. And all those, there's a lot of decisions a director has to make. So they don't have to be worried about, you know, filing permit paperwork or other stuff, paying crew or other stuff that comes up, and making sure that you carve out that space so that they can live in the director world and do their job to the fullest is like an important part of a producer's duties.
yeah, I would say just the last thing about it in the context of development, because development does mean a lot of like applications and a lot of like producing of documents, like what you were just talking about, Asia, like pitch decks. Like it's pretty much is going to have to be the creative person like driving that stuff. But it is also so valuable to be like, I can't even see what I'm doing anymore. Can you just take a look? And like having somebody to bounce those things off and be like, you've over explained this, like you can pare this down, or like I think you need another image here, you know, it's not totally clear. And that just that sounding board experience is so important to developing those documents. And so I typically will do most of the creatively focused things, pitch documents, director statements, synopses for the scripts, things like that. And then Kristyn, you will mostly do like budgeting, any kind of like producer statement stuff that's being asked for. What else do they usually ask for?
Oh, it can range all across, like a community impact.
Yes.
That type of documents. But also we got to say shout out to Eli Morris, because Eli is one of my producing partners, and they work with us pretty much on most of the stuff we've done, and Switchback being a big one we're working on. So Eli, you're the best.
I think it's so interesting to speak to trust as like especially from the director's perspective, because short film especially is such a director-driven medium. And when you start out in your career or starting out in film school or just coming out of film school, you've done so much of this yourself. You're responsible for putting together so many of the pieces yourself. And coming out into the industry where you then have to start working with collaborators to, you know, move into the next step, that recognition, I think, is such an interesting and important revelation to give to filmmakers who are emerging, which is that, you know, you at some point you have to learn to not do things, to give up that to somebody else. And as a producer as well, I know that the feeling of, I've hired a person to do this. Okay, right. I don't have to worry about this thing. This thing will be done. I'm going to arrive on set tomorrow, and there'll be somebody whose job it is to be responsible for making sure that's also like an element of trust that I think is as a producer is the thing you have to give up as well. And so I think it's really interesting to bring that into the process and recognize that that's a step you take as a filmmaker that I think really is the moment you emerge from the emerging artist to the, you know, establishing yourself, is really that moment where you can trust in others to move forward with the project. It's not going to disappear because you're not putting effort into it. Other people's jobs are about moving that forward as well. So I think that's really,
I think that's what was great. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, by all means.
I think, like, in the case of Asia and I, what was great is, like, I think Hatha was a really great beta test for us in a way, because she had taken that lead kind of executive producer role already. She had done the applications, secured the majority of the financing at that point, written the script. Like, it was all like, you know, it was it was made, it was ready to go. So my job really became, you know, execution and it's like, let's get this from page to screen. So in that sense, I think it was good, because we saw that we could work together. Like, it was a good test to be like, okay, we like working together, we work well together. Let's now, you know, expand this relationship. Now we're developing projects together, or, you know, just bouncing ideas off one another. And not to keep going on trust, but yeah, like to your point, like the trust goes both ways. Like I want Asia to know that, you know, when she shows up to set in the morning, she's not worried about, you know, where the trucks are parked because they're in the middle of her shot, because we've already thought about that. Like, that shouldn't be her. Although there is a funny story about that we'll talk about.
I was like, the way he's just laughing, there were trucks in our shot. That's great.
I'll put
We'll
that
get to that
in.
later, Kristyn.
Story
That's for the
about
story time
trucks.
portion. But then also it's like, you know, I want to know that we've hired all these people where, you know, as soon as we step on set, you know, we're running a clock and we're running a bank account. So I want to know that, you know, the person who is the director can do what they need to do, because, you know, Melanie, speaking to, like, you know, what you were saying about trust issues, is like, I've been in situations where, you know, great script, great idea, but then when we get on set, it's like, you know, things start to fall apart. So it's like, I think that it's not only the director has to have trust in the producer, but the producer has to then also have that trust in the director, that they can, you know, pull off what they wrote or pull off what they created.
I'd love to speak to resources. We've talked about, you know, how we get a project to the point where we're going to start filming it, but how do we get the resources together to actually move forward with the project? And here we're talking about like grants and contests and financing in general. So I'd love to hear how you guys approach gathering the resources for your project on the financial side. Let's start with maybe Melanie and Kristyn for this one.
Well, my little producer brain does not let me stop looking for deadlines. So that is one thing that I do bring to Kristyn often, is like, hey, I saw this thing, or hey, what do you think about this lab or this fund or this thing? And sometimes I will send like things that I'm thinking about applying for from like a development side of like script workshopping and stuff like that. But sometimes that will be like, hey, I saw this producer lab thing, you know, would you be interested, and kind of pass things on. That's just my way. And I think that comes from my artistic background as well, because when you're an artist and you're always looking for like gallery deadlines and grant opportunities, and you have to like maintain a calendar essentially so that you are staying on top of that. It's just a holdover from that into my like film life. But yeah, and then we discuss whether to apply to things, I think, like together.
Yeah, or what is possible with that budget, where the shortfalls are, what can make it work. But you know, this has come up on conversations Mike and I have had in the past. Every project's different, and there's no one formula, and you just tackle each project as it comes, and it's a little bit of a wish and a prayer at times, like that all the elements are going to come together. So yeah.
And Asia and Mike, same question. How do you gather resources? What are you looking for? What does that process look like?
Yeah, it's kind of like in terms of, you know, financing and things like that. It's like, you do have to, you know, when you are developing a project, you look at, okay, what makes sense? Like, is this, you know, something, you know, are there development funds we can access with this? Or, you know, is this, and, you know, certainly for me as a producer, like, I'm always kind of, you know, and I'm sure we all feel this, is our slates fill up quickly sometimes. So we're always thinking, like, I'm always tend to be thinking 2-3 years ahead. It's like, okay, so what's going to be in production a year? What are we going to be developing for the next year so that it goes into production after that? So, you know, kind of timing, you know, resources around that. But it's hard. Yeah, there's no perfect formula. Like, there's, you know, different funds are right for different projects. Like in the case of Nahaiku, like, I have to kind of tip my hat to Asia on this one. Like, this was something that she wanted to pitch to the DGC Greenlight program, which was not a program that was, you know, really on my radar for you know, reasons that I'm not a director. So that was something that she really kind of put a target towards and was like, I think we should go in for this. So in that sense, we kind of timed our resources and development around that target, as we want to make this happen. So that was more of a timed approach, but similarly, like, I think Asia's really good at like keeping her eye out for funds and deadlines and stuff like that. We're always kind of emailing each other back, like, hey, this is opening soon. Like, what do you think? Like some of the stuff we have in development, can we, you know, turn our resources towards that? So it's kind of just, you know, it's ebb and flow and timing, and yeah, just what works when it's right to work. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, like with Naha Eat Crew, like Mike and I both have our own separate production companies. So we kind of just like joined forces for that. And so it just allowed us to kind of access, I guess, a wider range of funding resources, which was great. So, you know, we could access funding through like the Indigenous Screen Office, TELUS, BC Arts Council, CMF, as well as the DGC fund that we received. And what's been really great about working with Mike is like some of these stories, you know, narrative sovereignty is such a huge importance for me, with like some of the stories about like Indigenous communities and whatnot. And, you know, Mike's always been like incredibly respectful of me having like creative control in that sense and having ownership over the stories. And so that's why we've kind of, on certain projects, have kind of worked that way, which is something that I've really appreciated, and kind of just goes back to the whole trust thing. So there are certain instances where I will be an executive producer because my company is attached. So I'll be a little bit more involved in some of the applications for funding. But ideally, I don't really want to deal with money. I hope like Mike just kind of handles most of that, which is great, because that's not really my thing. And the only other thing I'll add is like, I think too, just within the Vancouver kind of indie community, like we always have so many amazing supporters, like William F. White, like Tug at William F. White is always just someone we call up, and he's always just there.
So important. So important.
Yeah. And just like Keslow sponsored us, and you know, we have friends at Elemental Post, like friends who are just willing to kind of do things even though they're not really getting paid that much. So we're always really grateful for, you know, supporters like that and sponsors like that within the community as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, always happy to shout out community sponsors. Like they are how we get this done, by cutting us deals that we absolutely need to be able to work within the margins that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Can I add something too? I wanted to say, I think deciding whether to apply and when to apply for things is also a form of resource management, because you are managing this resource of like your energy, your time, other things you have going on. Like you don't always have time to apply for every single thing that comes along. And sometimes the amount of time you would spend on that application, you can't lose that time right now because you know, you're working on something else, or, you know, just like the timing of applications. And I know I wanted to bring this up because I know we have people watching this who are probably like, I have to go for everything, every opportunity, you know, and I used to think that way too, about like, I just cannot miss a deadline. And it's, you know, every missed deadline is like a missed chance. And I think at a certain point you do have to, this is why it's so good to have a collaborator, is like, you can really talk about like, this is what it's going to take to put this application together. What's your schedule really like? And do you have time to work on it? You know, and sometimes you have to rush anyway, you know, like attending a market or something, like sometimes things just come up, but yeah, just planning your own mental and emotional resources for like putting packages together that might not get you anything. Cause like, it's a big spend of your time. It's a big investment in your time to do those things. And so, yeah, it's good to have somebody to go, should we do this? Or is this kind of, we have too many other things to do right now, don't we? You know,
it's like permission to give yourself the space when needed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important note too, because I similarly, like when I was starting out, felt it's like, oh, there's a new deadline, I got to apply. If I don't apply, then, you know, that's like you said, a missed opportunity. And it's tempting too, because, you know, a lot of funds that are set up in this country are, you know, once a year. So it's like, oh, if I don't do this, then I got to wait a whole another year to make the project. But, you know, time can be an enemy, but it can also be your friend. Like, you know, I think, you know, like some of the projects that Asia and I are taking more time to develop are stronger because we're taking that time to, or we're just, I guess, doing it in a more comfortable fashion where we're not rushing as much because we've given ourselves that time. So, you know, it's, I think that's a really important note, Melanie, is just like knowing when is ready, because, you know, there's no sense in rushing a script that you're not going to be happy with for the sake of making a deadline, because then, you know, that lowers your chances anyway. So it's like, you got to be in a place where you feel like, yes, I have the bandwidth and the support to make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move into, we're moving towards production now. The process of bringing in key creatives and other collaborators into the project. Where does this emanate from for your team? Like, who do you target? Why do you target them? And is this coming from, a accessibility, or is this coming from like desire to work with that person as a creative? I'm going to toss this to Asia and Mike first.
Yeah, I think it's kind of I guess a multitude of reasonings. Like, I think Asia and I have a very similar circle of collaborators that we like to work with. A lot of, and probably the same as Melanie and Kristyn, quite frankly. So like a lot of the same people we like to bring in, oftentimes because we know they're good at what they do, or they're friends and we like to work with our friends. But then it's also, in the case of Nahaiku, we knew that we were stepping up quite a bit into territory that we probably weren't familiar with. So, we had a lot of work on the water and we had a lot of visual effects. So that meant really reaching out to, people we hadn't worked with before, but people who are very skilled in those particular fields, to know that they can bring it to life and make it happen. Because I think, the most paramount thing that I do as a producer, I'm not a director. The most important thing that I do is present the director with all the chess pieces to make it happen. And Asia's a part of that process too. I'm not just hiring people. She's bringing on people that, whether it be an editor or a production designer or a DOP that she wants to work with or has worked with. She's very much part of that process too. But it's always about, bringing in all the right resources to make it happen. And I think it's a constant combination of, you're accessing friends and close collaborators that you love and always want to work with. In some cases, bringing in new people because you've seen their work, and it's, for this particular project, it's like, oh, I think they'd be a really good fit. And then there's also I think the third piece of that equation is, when you're really punching above your weight, is bringing in the people who probably know more than you do. Like I always kind of say, if I'm the smartest person in the room, then I've got a problem. Like I want to surround myself with people that are far smarter than me, which I think I've done successfully so far. But Asia, do you want to add anything onto that?
I mean, it's pretty much like you said, Mike. Like, it's a combination of, sometimes we want to work with people we've worked with before. Sometimes there's people that we've been really wanting to work with. Sometimes there's certain, circumstances where there'll be a particular person that might be more suited for the project. Like, for example, with Nahaiku, Alfonso had experience shooting on the water. He had experience in visual effects. So that's a really big reason why we wanted to bring him on board. And of course, too, like when you're hiring someone, you want to make sure that they're like equally as passionate about the story. Is super important, especially in the short world. Like a lot of us, we're not making money when we make short films. And so you want to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who really believe in you and really believe in the story. So that's also really important. And it kind of just depends too, like with Doc, like there's times where I'm going into community and like we have limited resources and I need someone who's really just kind of can like go with the flow and go like kind of just run around with the camera. Whereas there's other like amazing cinematographers who maybe can't work that way and they need more resources. So it really depends on so many factors. But I will say for me, like attitude on set is so important. And so I'm always looking to surround myself with people who are going to have a positive attitude, who are going to be respectful to other crew members. Like I think the film industry has historically been a little bit of a toxic space, and very hierarchical. And I just feel like I want to see that change. And I feel like I can be a part of that change just by making sure that the sets that I'm running aren't that way. So that's something that's really important to me, as well, just when we're kind of working along that way. And I think just kind of going back to what Melanie was saying about like the nice thing about shorts is you can kind of experiment. You can try things out, but then you can also just almost test like working relationships with some people. And, maybe that'll lead you to doing a feature with that person down the road. So yeah, I think it just really depends on the project and those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. Shout out to Alfonso Chin, who we're big fans of, I think, all across this panel. He was gracious enough to join us for our cinematography panel back in April. Just a great guy who I've known for a really long time and really like his work a lot. Kristyn and Melanie, I'd like to move this to you. What's the process of approaching key creatives, bringing them on, how you work with them, who you choose, that whole shebang?
I don't know if I have anything to add to Mike and Asia really nailed it. It's like, it's a combination of wanting to work with some people are always going to be your first call, but then you like to work with different people. And I think getting to work with people that think differently than you too, and are bringing different pieces to the table, and then the culture on set and having that attitude and the way that you're treating people on set is both really important to me and Melanie as well.
Yeah, I would say because I am a fairly emotionally driven artist, do you know what I mean? So like the set environment will really affect my creative process. And so I really want to work very hard to make sure that it's going to be a very positive, positive sounds so flighty, but like just
Comfortable,
a very nurturing environment, so that not just me, all of my crew, my actors, they feel that same feeling that I feel, which is that like, hey, we're all here for the same reason. We're all here to achieve the same thing. And we're all giving each other the right like feelings and space in order to do our best with this material or with this location or with these limitations. As you said, you know, short films, like there's often so many limits and people aren't being paid and all of that. So, you know, where can people get the fulfillment? Well, they can get it from that creative output, from that, you know, like producing something we're really proud of or being really satisfied by what they've done. And you don't get that if you have a really negative set environment. You don't get that if you have a really antagonistic set environment. And so it's like very, very important to me to like caretake that. And I think the one other thing I'll add is that I often really trust to Kristyn to suggest crew, because the thing about being a director is that I don't work as often as she does. Like she's producing things more often than I'm directing things. Does that make sense? So I'm not necessarily meeting as many people as she is. So I really trust her to like know, like, you know, oh yeah, I've worked with this person, I worked with this person, or, you know, especially certain departments that I don't necessarily have a lot of contacts in. Like I very much trust to her to find those people. But I also will often come with a little bit of a wish list of people. If there are people that I've had my eye on, whether that's like a cinematographer or an actor. And I think you tend to facilitate my wish list as like our first sort of reaching out. And then if those don't work out for whatever reason, then I'm always like, well, who else would you recommend? You know, if I don't have somebody, you know, next on that list or whatever. And I think that's been a really good, like, back and forth in terms of finding the right people, because it gives me, because like a lot of times those key creatives, like that's going to be my main collaborator on set, you know, in the creative end of things. And so like I want recommendations because I don't work as often as I would love to. So I don't get to meet as many and work with as many, you know, say cinematographers as I would like to. So I really am trusting for recommendations essentially from Kristyn, from other work you've done or other, you know, you've heard about people from other producers and things like that, right? So yeah.
I really like how much everybody's speaking to the idea of like the set dynamic. Because I think that that's personally something that you struggle with in your indie part where you don't have much control over that environment. And I think the real hallmark of moving forward with your comfort level with as you move forward through your career is really being able to establish the way you want your day to go, the way you want people to interact with each other.
I might slightly disagree with you. I feel like you actually maybe have a little more control because there's no like studio or executive producers that you might have to answer to, or other people that are hiring that is not you. You do get to set that control and pace in an indie set. So I think that is something that we can control more. So
I definitely think it's somewhere we have to get to. But I know that like in a lot of projects where you kind of come on as either the last minute or late on, or because it's a favor to somebody, there's the dynamic isn't always what you'd prefer if you could have your perfect situation. I agree with you that we definitely should strive towards that, especially when you don't have those kind of external controls. Like working on a union set versus working on an indie set has a very different dynamic. And definitely, I think as we start to curate and create our own working environments, that the more control we have over making everybody have a pleasant time, I think it's a really good dynamic to try to strive towards, and not we wake up every day, we go to set, we want to be there, right? Like we want to be there, we want other people to want to be there. And I think it's so interesting to speak to that dynamic being such a part of the why you hire people or why you choose people over other people. Because I think we've definitely all worked with people who we would target as maybe not necessarily bring on the next time, because we understand how they interact with these people, or you might feel like I can bring this person on, but if I bring this person on, I can't bring this person on. And that's also an interesting dynamic to try to balance.
I think I certainly agree with those statements, but I think the most important thing that I like, just talking about dynamics, is like the director and producer just need to be able to set that tone and take charge. Like Kristyn is saying, like, shit rolls downhill, right? And it's like, I know I'm not always the best at hiding my emotions. So when people probably know when I'm pissed, but I worked with a producer once, and no matter how that day was going, no matter how many fires were burning, you'd ask him, hey, how's it going? And he's like, top 5 days ever. That was always fun. And it was like kind of comic, like it was kind of sarcastic, but it was also like, it kind of puts you in a good mood, to the point of like, and that was something that really stuck to me. So I don't knock it out of the park 100% of the time, but as one of the captains of the ship, along with somebody like Asia, always trying to have that positive attitude, because at least if we look like we know what we're doing and we're happy and we want to be there, everybody else should as well. But if I'm going around all upset and depressed and stuff like that, it's like, well, then if I don't want to be here, why does anybody else want to be here, right? So you really have to take charge of that.
I would also point out that the majority of the stories I hear these days about people who are or problematic environments on set or whatnot, it's always something about the conduct on set. It's really always about somebody does something that makes other people feel uncomfortable, and then we have to talk about that, and that becomes a thing. And I think that something, if I can put this out there to people who are growing in their careers, it's really understand that your conduct on set, it's going to be talked about. It's going to reflect how you go through the rest of your career. People are going to discuss you. If all they know is that one thing that you did, or all they're talking about when your name gets brought up is that thing, then that's what you're going to be represented as. It doesn't matter what you feel like you're trying to represent yourself as. It really just matters what you did and what people's perception of that was. And so I think that that's just a big part of it as well. And it's why I like to speak to dynamic on set as much as we do, because that's where people are going to know you and interact with you. And as to Melanie said, as to Melanie said, like that's with Kristyn working, more than them, the dynamic that Kristyn recognizes of people who they work with, that's how that's going to be carried over.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do when you mess up, that is actually the most important thing.
Yeah.
You've made a mistake or you mess up, because there is a way to own it and like move on, and there's a way to not.
Maybe also the tightest rope to walk, because I think that, and this definitely doesn't get spoken about enough, but there's this interesting dynamic with public versus private. And when you've wronged somebody, it's not up to you to make a public gesture about writing that. But when you're in an environment like film, you kind of have to, in some ways, both make a private conciliatory gesture that is recognition by the person who was wronged that you guys are on a comfortable level now. But at the same time, you also have to make some sort of public declaration that illustrates that conciliatory gesture has been made and it's been earnest, and that's such a difficult like balancing act, I feel, for a lot of people, and something I don't know if anybody really knows how to do perfectly.
No, and like I think like to Kristyn's point, it's about how you approach those situations, right? Like, because the reality is like this is a small business, so it's like if I get a resume and I see, oh, this person's worked with Kristyn, I'm going to call Kristyn and be like, oh, how was this person, right? And yeah, like how you handle those situations, like I don't think anybody expects perfection on an indie film set. We're working with limited resources, limited time, but it's like to Kristyn's point, it's like, how are you going to handle that? Are you going to stab me in the back or stab me in the front? I'd rather be stabbed in the front. So
maybe no stabbing at all. Maybe that's the real
ideally, yeah.
the real takeaway.
You got to call the audible, right?
Yeah, it really is the case that all the producers, especially in an industry this small, speak to each other. We talk to each other. We discuss. And as new blood comes into the industry and those people filter in, obviously you get some fresh starts, but people talk and people speak to each other, and they ask for references, and producers know each other, and that's really all they talk about when they get together, is what experiences they had and how they can share that with each other. So it's and I want to speak to also the how the role shifts into production. So we've talked about that trust and comfort about moving and making the environment in production comfortable. But like, let's speak to how the director-producer relationship shifts as we move from development into production. What does that look like? How does it look different? Is there a change in the dynamic? Is there a conscious effort that's made by your part, or is it more of like a subconscious kind of moving into a different process? And let's start with Melanie and Kristyn on this one.
Yeah, I think like I feel like I've said this to you before, so you correct me if I have. But I feel like I try to be very clear about like, once we hit the morning of the first day of shooting, like I don't want to be thinking about fires. I can't. But I'm happy to help with solving problems right up until that point, because oftentimes like I am putting money in to project, like I want to be informed because it is ultimately my money that might be being partly spent, or you know what I mean? And so like I don't want surprises where I'm not told about problems. But once I'm shooting, I don't want to be told about problems, because like I said, because I am the type of creator I am, I think that it can really infect my mindset, and how I'm able to like what I'm able to spend my mental energy on set. And I really want that to be like 100% on the story, the shots, the actors. I don't want to be thinking about lunch. I don't want to be thinking about a permit issue. I don't want to be thinking about it. But like I said, right up until the day of shooting, I'm happy to help with that stuff. And I think that's just partly because of my prior, producing brain and my, like I said, inability to let go of certain things. And I think you are really good about doing that. Like, keeping me involved as much as possible so that I don't feel blindsided by anything, but then being like very good at like drawing that line once we get to camera, so that I can hopefully be the best director I can be, because I am not distracted in any way, and I'm fully supported, and I'm fully just know that things are being handled essentially.
I'm always thinking about lunch. The moment I step on set, I'm like,
What's lunch?
Lunch time.
What is lunch?
That's coming up. No, I guess every producer maybe does a little differently, but I generally do like to be on set, but like I don't need to be right there. I don't need to be behind the camera. I'm kind of trying to foresee what's coming up in the day and making sure everyone's on top of getting ready for what's next, moving things along, keeping everything smooth, keeping everyone safe, and that type of thing. So, and then let the people who need to be there play in front of the camera and just behind the camera.
Asia and Mike, how does your relationship differ once you get to camera?
Well, I think like we're still obviously in constant communication, but I definitely, my belief is like when the director's on set, that is their time. Like I'm not there to helicopter. I'm not there to control. Like I like to be at Village when I can, obviously on the lower, like, Asia and I first started working out on very low budget projects. So I was wearing 4 or 5 different hats. So I think on half I was just a blur. Like I was just like, hey, how's it going? Bye. And check in, make sure she's drinking water, make sure she's eating. But otherwise,
thank you, producers, for keeping
but as the projects have gotten bigger, I've been able to build out more of a support team, like production managers and locations managers, office staff, things like that. So it's allowed me to be a bit more involved at Village, but I still, my belief is like that's Asia's time. Like I've given my notes in development, I've given my thoughts on casting, on the script, what have you. If like I like to be there, so if Asia says, hey, can I bounce something off you, I'm there to give my 2 cents if I can. But I'm not the kind of producer that's like, oh, I think you should do it like that. Like that's just not how I like to operate. In terms of, I will say, in other things, I'm kind of a person where I will, and Asia could probably speak to this, I will sometimes withhold information from her that perhaps she doesn't need to know right at that very moment. But that's not because I'm trying to like hide it from her. It's more because I want to, if I have a problem, I want to come to her with a solution or a number of solutions first. I don't want to say, hey, we can't shoot this scene because of this. I want to say, here's the situation. This is going to be challenging. Here are my proposed solutions. Because as a director too, she's got 100 people yapping at her all day long, asking her questions. So if I come along and just present a problem with nothing, that's not really fair to her, right? Like just to put her in that scenario. So I will admit I sometimes hold information back temporarily until I have a solution to present to her. But it's in good faith. I
appreciate it. Because like Melanie said, like I don't want to be thinking about everything that's going wrong when I'm just trying to direct and focus on the story and the actors. But yeah, Mike's usually just running around putting out fires, and usually at the end of the day I'll kind of hear what went wrong and like, oh wait, we can't find the RV key because it was dropped in the lake, or we gotta call an ambulance or whatever. Like usually I'll hear it at the end of the day. But I've ever asked Mike, I was like, okay, like what's actually going on though? Like he would tell me. But usually I don't really want to be thinking about those things or worrying about those things. So that's usually how
sorry, go ahead, Asia.
That's usually just how it goes. Like, you're kind of running around putting out fires, but then if I'm having like a meltdown, you'll be there for like emotional support. So it goes both ways.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think like we're still in, constant communication and still constantly like chatting, because I think it's important too, like Asia mentioned briefly before, like in some of these projects that we've done, it's important for her to be in an executive producer capacity as well. So in that regard, I also feel it's my responsibility to make sure that she's aware of everything. It's not, I can't just not tell her things. But it's like, there's a time and a place for certain conversations, and some of that is after wrap, and some of it's a couple months down the road when you're in post-production.
I think it's a good practice to have a little debrief at the end of the day, and not just even for like fires, but like what worked for you, what didn't work for you, like what can we improve, like emotionally, how is everything going, how are the people acting on set. Just like a small little debrief at the end of most days, I think helps keep the train running smoothly.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said, Asia. Like when I'm having a moment and I need to like just go and get maybe centered or have just somebody be like, it's okay. The first person that I'm going to go to for that is going to be Kristyn, is going to be my producer, because for one thing, they're the person who has been caretaking the project with me from before we were on set. So they're going to know all the things that went into what's happening on set. They're also aware of everything that's happening on set. And they're also going to be the person who's going to be with me after set. So like the people who are on set, I don't want even if they're my best friends, I don't want them to be aware that I'm having like a little issue. I think that the most trustworthy person for me to potentially go to in that moment is my producer, because we can have it privately, and then I can kind of and then get back in there and be fine. And that is like a huge resource to have on set. Not that like you're my therapist on set, but like you're my co-conspirator. You're my, you know, like it's just somebody who has my back, basically. Yeah.
You know, Mike, you touched on it where I wanted to move to with this, but like, let's discuss how this relationship further evolves as you move into post-production. So we've talked about this transition. So now what changes once you move from production to post-production, and how does that differ from development and production, pre-production as well? Let's start with you two.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Asia speak to this a little bit more too, but I think, you know, I like to be, you know, a bit more involved in the post-production phase. Like typically what we've done is, you know, like the director and the editor will work on like kind of a first pass independently to the point of when they're happy, and then I'll kind of come in and try and give more notes, because oftentimes with these indie productions too is like you make great plans and great shot lists and great everything in pre-production, and then you get to the day and it's like, oh, there are not enough minutes in the day to make this happen, so you end up scrambling and, you know, changing things on the fly. So your edit plan has to change a little bit too, so it's a bit more, you know, malleable. So you know, there's a lot of, you know, what if we try this, or, you know, have we considered, you know, why don't we try this instead, you know? So it's a lot more back and forth, and I think that's an area that Asia and I work in particularly well together, is like, you know, if she's having, you know, her and the editor have tried just about everything, and then, you know, I can kind of come in with a fresh pair of eyes who maybe hasn't seen the first couple cuts, or I didn't see every single shot on set. So, you know, it's a little bit more of a fresh pair of eyes. Oh, what if we have you considered this? Or, you know what, this performance isn't hitting as much for me, like, you know, let's try some alternatives and stuff like that. So that's an area I like to be a bit more involved in. But so I think if anything, it's like it kind of goes, you know, kind of hand in hand with development and pre-production. That's where I feel the most involved, and then certainly again in post. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I can add too much to that, but I will say it's like very collaborative, and, you know, I always really appreciate Mike's notes, but he's also very respectful of like the director's vision and will always like defer to me for kind of any final decisions. But like, I always value his input on everything, and, you know, we get to sit in the studio together, which is great. And just kind of getting that fresh perspective just goes like so far, especially when you're just so like stuck in something and you're kind of getting tunnel vision, just like looking at the same thing over and over. So it's great to always get that new perspective from someone you trust.
Melanie and Kristyn, same question. How does your relationship evolve as you move into post?
I kind of like to wait until Melanie and whatever other collaborator, like editor or sound designer or colorist, want feedback. Like I don't need to be in the mud there with them, and like exactly what Mike said, like a new fresh eyes perspective, what's working, what isn't. And I tend to also let them do what they like, as long as I don't feel like there's any like major red flags. Like a lot of times I'm just watching it or listening to it and being like, great, you're on the right track. Like, here's some spots that aren't really resonating with me. But the other thing is I like to question some things, like some choices, but as long as the director has a good reason, like can justify why this is the creative choice, I'm like, great. I just needed to know you weren't doing it like for the sake of doing it, that it all has like a purpose, and is if you can like explain to me like why you want it that way, I'm totally happy to let you have it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it's very similar to what you described. I think sometimes I can get so lost in the weeds because I know what I wrote, and then I know what I shot, and then now I'm dealing with that in the edit, you know, and there's sometimes there can be, especially with like a certain moment or a certain shot, where like you just can't quite let it go because you have all this other baggage coming into the reason. And sometimes, you know, your producer can just come in and be like, that shot's just not that great. Like, I know that you love that shot, but it's just not that great. And you have a better choice that you could make, you know, and sometimes like having that other perspective will allow you to release some of that baggage that you're bringing into those cut choices or shot choices or take choices, if it's like an acting take or whatever. And I definitely rely on you for that, like just to get me out of like a little bit of a spiral sometimes with certain things where I'm like, I know I didn't get it. Like I didn't get what I wanted out of the shot, but like nobody knows that except me, right? So let's not cut for the thing that's missing. Let's cut for what's there, you know? And then sometimes you can come up with like a way better choice actually. And you realize you can lose lines or you can lose, you know, bits that you thought were like totally essential, because that transition from, you know, it's that old adage, right? Like you make the film 3 times. It's like you write it and then you shoot it and then you cut it. And the cut is like, ultimately it's like the 3rd draft of that, you know, process. And there's lots to still discover in the edit room if you allow yourself to discover it. But having somebody who can provide a lot of perspective, like a different perspective, is so critical, I think, to the success of that process. So yeah, similar to this.
Yeah, well, and I just want to say too, like, I think Kristyn brings up a really important note. Like, I think like disagreement is part of this process too, right? Like Asia and I won't always see everything eye to eye perfectly. I might have one idea, she might have an idea that's different. But I think what the key to these relationships is we can disagree or we can have differences of opinion. But like to Kristyn's point, like if there's a reason that you're doing it, great. Or even if we have differences of opinion, like, you know, the great thing about, you know, this relationship is, you know, we can disagree and then not go home and hate each other, right? Right? It's like, it's just, you know, it's a creative difference that we have, but and eventually we'll arrive at a place where we're both like, yeah, this is great. But you know, it's totally normal, and I think it's, you know, better to, you know, have those moments where you disagree, right? Because it's part of the process in a way.
I think Asia used a great term earlier, which is creative sovereignty. And I really, what I wanted to speak to is this. I have a 2-part question, one for the directors and a similar one for the producers. But essentially, how do you maintain your creative individuality during a project? Let's go to Melanie first for this.
Ooh, I think honestly, by being the originator of the idea, like, because if it's coming from you, like I find it very hard to completely lose my project to someone else when I originated it. So I think that it's more likely for me to struggle with owning the concept if I've like been brought on to something, because I am really, I think maybe because I'm so conscious that when it's my idea, I don't want to be derailed, that I don't want to then derail the person who's, if it's like a writer who has hired me or something, like I want to be like, you know, what do you see? Because I want to try to honor, you know, what you intended or what you wrote or what you imagined, while still being able to add something, you know, add value, but like not take it away from them. And so when it's my own stuff, I, you know, hang on very tightly to those aspects of it. I love collaborating. I love, you know, having people come in with new perspectives on my concept, or new images that I haven't seen, or a new perspective on a character, you know, in terms of like performance. I love. I mean, I don't think you can work in film if you don't like working with other people. Like it's kind of if that is not for you, film is probably not for you, you know, like you have to love working with other people. But you know, it is like the essential job of a director. You have to have somebody in charge. You have to have somebody saying yes or no to those contributions, ultimately. And so, you know, the more strongly that I feel about the original idea, and often it's I don't get super caught up. Well, you can tell me if I'm wrong about this. I don't think I get super caught up in like micro details. I really care about themes and I really care about symbolic imagery. And those are the two things that I'm always going to hang on the tightest to. So if the image, like if the frame is not living up to what I know I need or I see or I have envisioned, like I will fight to get the frame where I want the frame to be, you know, things like that. But when it comes to, you know, the delivery of a line or changing a line on set, like I'm very open to doing that. I'm also very open to like shifting my shot list around, you know, if certain shots are not going to work. But like when it comes down to the actual stuff that is tying the themes together, is tying the symbolic imagery together, like I really have, I'm going to dig my feet in a little bit more on those moments. And I think that ultimately, like in my mind, that is what is the directing of the ship, you know, is like keeping the anchor, you know, steady so that you can like weather these little waves and crests and things that are going to come in the form of problems, but also in the form of different ideas that are going to come and, you know, sort of come up. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It does. Asia, can you speak to how you maintain your creative individuality during a project?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a lot of kind of what Melanie was saying. Like, I think there's this kind of saying of like too many cooks in the kitchen, I think, which can sometimes happen. And there's just too many opinions being thrown at you. And you just kind of have to like take the reins sometimes and take control and be persistent and be vocal and just make sure that, you know, your vision's being respected. Like, there's certainly been instances on sets and like other projects where, you know, that maybe there's been like a cinematographer who has been like almost trying to direct or take control of like the set and things like that. And like, I've had to step up, and it can be an uncomfortable thing. And it's not something that would come naturally from like my personality, but you just kind of have to do it, because if you don't, like, people are just going to kind of like trample over you and try to take advantage of you. Especially as like a female identifying filmmaker. Like, I feel like that happens to me sometimes where people just kind of try to dominate a set or like speak over me, and I just kind of have to be really firm about it and step up. So that's something that's kind of I've learned to do throughout, you know, my directing career, and just something that I'm still working on and will constantly, I'm sure, be working on. And there's also other instances too where like I worked with producers who have tried to be really controlling or take up a lot of space, and it just kind of comes back to you just having to be, once again, just like persistent and just making sure that like you're being heard, and you have to fight for that sometimes.
And to the producers, what I'd like to know is how do you protect the director's creative individuality, and while also still maintaining your own, because you're still a creative individual and that's still an impact on the project. So I'd like to know how you guys establish that. So let's go to Mike first for this one.
Yeah, well, I think it's like I think there's an important, you know, oftentimes on indie environments, they can be more collaborative than, say, you know, bigger shows, more, you know, potentially unionized shows or big studio shows, which I think is great, which is one of the things I love most about the indie world. That being said, I do believe that there is a certain amount of hierarchy that still needs to exist within that. And what I mean by that is it is still the director's decision to, like, you know, I still leave the majority of the decisions up to the director or Asia. Like, certainly if there are logistical or finance decisions that have to be weighed, obviously that lands in my column. But on you know, a lot of my projects, I don't allow for, you know, DPs to try and take the reins of things or stuff like that, because that just doesn't fly, in my opinion. Like, I'm all about a collaborative experience, but at the same time, you know, myself and the director are putting a lot of time, a lot of effort. Like, you know, we're in it a lot longer than, you know, the majority of the crew. There's a lot more at stake potentially for us as well. So, you know, I think that has to be clearly defined. And in terms of, you know, retaining my own, you know, creative sovereignty, is like, I just, you know, it's important to me that when I do begin a new relationship with a director or a project, is that I do feel that my opinions or my thoughts are going to be respected or considered. Like, not every thought has to make it in. Like, I'm not a creative genius by any stretch of the imagination, but just to know that we have that collaborative ability is really important. Like, I think, unfortunately, sometimes in the indie environment, we do like, and maybe Kristyn can speak to this a little bit too, but I've gotten, emails where it's like, I need a producer, but I really just need you for paperwork and, permits and, budgets and that sort of stuff. And I don't take those jobs because, I'm going to be like we've been saying for like the past couple hours, is like, these are babies, right? That we're making and we're raising. And it's like, in the case of a feature film, you're in it for 2, 3, 4 years. And it's like, I don't want to be just doing your paperwork for 2, 3, 4 years. Like, it's got to be something that I'm interested in, or something that I want to, for a variety of reasons, bring to screen. So, when I start a relationship with a director, I want to know that creative input is going to be respected and considered. And, Asia and I have always had that, which is great.
Kristyn, same question to you. How do you maintain Melanie's creative control while still giving yourself a space for that?
Yeah, those emails where it's like, I've done all the work for the application, I just need to attach your name. And you're like, yeah, no, that's actually the opposite of what I'm looking for. They think they're doing you a favor or something by having done everything, that you want to collaborate. So, in giving Melanie the space, I think that everyone has kind of spoken to that way of, they're making it clear they're the boss of the creative, and I'm the boss of everything else. And if those two things are clashing, then we will talk it out and figure out the solution. Because, sometimes there is. We're running out of time. The first AD comes to you. Oh, Melanie wants to do this thing. You're like, oh, do they? Interesting. There's always, there's like a little bit of that type of thing. But one of the things that's great about Melanie is that they really know what they want, but they are also flexible. And those two things might sound like they're in conflict, but they are the perfect pairing of of being really specific about certain things, but then not so precious about others, and being flexible to make adjustments as needed for production. So I think that has never been like a super big challenge in this creative partnership. Maintaining that. And exactly what Mike said is you want to feel like there is the welcoming of your creative input, the space to share it, listening to it, welcoming it, inviting it. And you don't have to take it at all, but like feeling that there is that space to have a dialogue and work on it together.
Yeah, I think it kind of all comes back to that word trust. But an extension of that is just respect. So like, I have respect for your opinions, and you have respect for mine, and the mutual respect means that we can listen to each other, we can disagree, we can agree, and it doesn't really matter what the outcome is, because sometimes you're totally going to be right and I need to listen, and sometimes I'm going to be right, but having the baseline there is what allows us to do that, that sort of back and forth. And I think, it's funny, I just thought of this, but I think that, because our producer director relationship was formed on Shuttlecock, which was a Crazy Eights film, which is a very unique environment because it's so rushed, especially the post process is so rushed. In a weird way, it was such a good crucible for like figuring out that like, hey, this works. Like, this works really well, and it works like under a lot of pressure. And so then, theoretically, like as you move forward and do other things where maybe there might be like less pressure on certain aspects of the production, and this is probably going to continue to work. So, that thus formed a partnership, right?
So we've been talking about the evolution of the relationship over the course of different phases of the production. What I want to talk about now is how it changes as it goes into exhibition. We were festivals and distribution, and how does the division of labor look like for this phase as well, especially where, in the marketing side of things, the director might now be the more public face, while the producer might now be the more behind the scenes. But can you guys speak to what exhibition looks like for your relationships, really? And I'll start with Mike and Asia on this one.
Yeah, well, I think, so far, the projects that Asia and I have done together that have been released have been short films. And, in touring the festival circuit, especially at some of the bigger festivals that we've been lucky enough to attend, I think it's important, but it is also the reality is that, the director really becomes the face of the film at that point. And that's a thing I'm totally fine with. Like I don't mind Asia taking the lead in that, because in a lot of cases too is like nobody knows this better than her really. Like I try to sync up as much as I possibly can, but when it's something like Nahaiku that she has developed, like she came up with the idea, wrote the script, shot it, was heavily involved in post. Like nobody knows it better than her. So it makes sense for her to take I think the front seat in terms of media and Q&As and that sort of stuff. And I don't really love talking about myself or being or being in front of photo walls and stuff like that. So I'm totally fine to pass the buck to Asia on that, as long as they invite me to the after party. Sometimes they don't. That's a problem.
Speak my parties.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess like when we're applying to festivals, like normally Mike will just kind of take the lead on that, and we'll have a discussion about like which festivals do we want to target, and have like kind of a list of festivals that we have in mind. But there'll be instances sometimes where like, for example, like I had a previous short film at TIFF, so I reached out to one of the programmers and was like, hey, I have this like new film, Nahaiku, and sent them a screener. So sometimes it's really helpful for the directors who have like previous relationships with certain festivals to reach out. But in other instances, like we'll have connections with festivals and he'll reach out about seeing if they have any interest or if they have any waivers. So we kind of split it up that way, but we're always on the same page about like which festivals we're targeting, and then we'll kind of just like go from there.
Yeah.
And Kristyn and Melanie, can you speak about exhibition? I know, Kristyn, this is like unique to you because you also saw it from the programmer side.
Yeah, I came like festivals was my entryway into the independent film community, and so I have a little bit of that's where I'm always like, I can't release control of that. I have done the festival and delivery for every film I've ever been involved with, because I'm just like, don't worry, I know how to do it. I've got it. I know the ins and outs of all the elements. But like you said, it's once you get out there, it's really the creative force that people want to hear from. It's the writer, director, and luckily Melanie is very good at speaking to all those things that are really resound with people, like the thematic layering and the tone and what we're trying to say with the film. So it's great to have a director that is willing to be that forward face of the film and can step into that role, because that is really what is the best for the film in the marketing of the film. And same thing though, I just want to go and then go to the parties. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like, because I've had previous experiences with projects prior to working with Kristyn, where like, quite honestly, like I did everything and then, did all the submissions and then went to all the festivals by myself. And like, that's fine. It's my film. Somebody once said this to me, like, nobody is going to care as much about it as you, because it's yours. And that's true, but it's very lonely to do that. I mean, it's artistically very like fulfilling in the sense of like, I brought this thing to life and I feel really proud of it. But like to go to festivals and at a certain point you can start to feel like you're just talking in an echo chamber about your own, your own creativity. And so this experience that I've had in the past few years of being able to like go to festivals with Kristyn, with other producers, with cast, it's just really changed my feelings and my relationship to festivaling in general. And like, I don't really want to go by myself anymore. I like, even if I'm still the one who's going to be primarily in the Q&As and stuff, I just think that there's something different about bringing something that you made together to somewhere to celebrate it, and I don't really want to go back from that now that I've had a taste of that, because it is such a different experience to share a thing that you shared, and it just continues that whole process, and it feels really great. So, I as much as possible, I think we try to go to things together. At least like on Shuttlecock, we had like 4 of us kind of caretaking that film. And so sometimes only one person could go, but every time we were like rooting for them and cheering them on. And it wasn't always me. Sometimes, it was our lead actor. Sometimes, sometimes it was two people. So it was really cool for the first time for me to be like, oh, other people like really care about this thing that I made and are willing to like go out and show it to other people, like as our thing. And yeah, it's been a big change, a big positive change. So I prefer that now.
I think you guys had a really adorable festival gimmick for Shuttlecock, where
Shuttlecock.
Well, with Rona with the birdie earrings and the stuffed birdie as well.
People either liked it or they thought we were like the most obnoxious thing they had ever. And that's fine. We get it.
And I say this with love, coming from the same environment, right? Like that little era of Crazy Eights films, like those few years, we all kind of were, very proud of ourselves and very proud of the projects that we made back then. And I think that with Shuttlecocks, Kay, you can come off as arrogant if they want to feel that way, but no, you come off as really loving your film and really supporting it. And I think that, from a producing standpoint, the more you can do to represent the work of your collaborators and the work of the people who were involved in the project, the better. And it's a short film. They're not really going to receive the same accolades they would with a feature. So if you can create an environment that's fun and that gets people to remember your project based on that, that's the goal. So no, who has the stuffed birdie? Like, who still has that?
It's at Rona's house, yeah.
But I also want to add to this because here's the thing. When you make more dramatic projects, those are the projects that are going to, quite frankly, and this is just from experience, they're going to go to bigger festivals. They're going to win more prizes. Comedy doesn't do that.
Right.
Comedy wins prizes at comedy festivals.
Right.
Sometimes.
Or audience choice.
Or
maybe.
sometimes audience
Yeah.
choice, right? But generally speaking, like a comedy, you're not going to be getting best performances, best cinematography, best script. Like it doesn't happen very often. And so for me, like the way that I like to think about it is that the celebration of the film is not going to be in the prizes. It's going to be in your enthusiasm for sharing it at the festival. So our antics, however, obnoxious they might have seemed, like that's the way for us to celebrate, because we know none of our crew are going to get prizes. Like it just, even though they totally deserve it, but it's just, that's just not how comedy is rewarded in festivals. And if we were touring with a drama, we would be absolutely acting differently, because it's just going to be a different festival experience anyways. So yeah, just a shout out to anybody out there directing comedy. It's really hard because it really sucks when you know that like your crew worked really hard, but they don't like get a lot of accolades, because comedy tends to not be rewarded in that way.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And as coming from the perspective of like the Vancouver Short Film Festival, which is, a local festival that showcases a lot of films from this community specifically, that's a great space for being like that, being that way, and getting to enjoy that kind of like local party around your project and that kind of stuff. So I definitely I enjoyed your guys' presence at VSFF the year you guys played. I mean, Shuttlecock is one of my favorite Crazy Eights. I don't know if I've ever come out and publicly said that, but it's just such a fun project. I want to ask a final question, and then we can bounce into some story time stuff. The movie's over. It's run its festival. What's next? How do you approach the next steps? Do you take a break? Do you move on to the next thing? Is there already irons in the fire? I think we've spoken a little bit to the idea of having, next projects already kind of lined up. But I want you guys to discuss like what comes when the movie's done. This is what I'd like to kind of end on here. So Mike and Asia, can you start to speak to this, and then we'll move on to Kristyn?
Yeah, certainly. Like once some of our projects that we worked on, once they're completed their festival run, I always try and look for, further distribution or broadcast opportunities. So we were very lucky with Hatha that the film was licensed by CBC Canadian Reflections after it completed its festival run. So it had a bit more of an audience life after that. I mean, it's like, from a producing perspective, I try to do everything I can so that a film doesn't die after its festival run, because it happens all too often that these films have great festival runs or what have you, and then they just become a Vimeo link that sits on the shelf and you send to friends and family every now and again. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I just try to extend the life as much as possible. And I think we're all looking for bigger audiences or bigger avenues to share our content. So just trying to extend the life as much as possible. I mean, that being said, we don't all have the bandwidth to keep our short films from going forever, because we do want to move on to the next project. We do want to start developing what is next. And I think with Asia and I, that usually starts pretty quickly. Sometimes she's pitching me things in production, or excuse me, post-production. Production would be a little aggressive.
A bit longer than that.
Just on set one day, she's like, "Hey, this is great, but what are we gonna do next?" It's like, whoa, something at a time.
I've definitely done that before, and it's not a bad idea. It works.
Everybody has their own method, right? But yeah, I think with Asia and I, it's pretty, like, we're always trying to think one step ahead, like what's next. And Asia, being the creative force that she is she's always got ideas and scripts on the go and multiple things. So it's fun to sort of think, okay, well, what do you want to do next? Like, what are you've done this, Nahaiku, that was an interesting experience. What's the next thing that you want to try and tackle? And in our case, it's a feature film, so starting development on that. But yeah, so I think it's kind of those two elements, is like seeing how we can extend the life of a short, in our case a short, but this would apply to any project, seeing how we can extend that through further distribution or licensing opportunities, and then starting to plot for the future.
Yeah, and I guess just adding to that, like, the great thing about a short is, like, it really can be a great proof of concept for a feature. And like, I think for us, like, Nahaiku is that, like, eventually when we do the feature version. So that's also the great thing about shorts. And then the only other thing I'll add is that Mike and I never take breaks after a project. The next thing on the go. That's just how
always seems to roll one into the other. Yeah.
Nice.
Melanie and Kristyn, same question. Film's over. What's next?
I feel like ideally you have something that you're excited to be working on, but to speak to that point that we brought up a little bit about, like, maybe carving out that space for you, or always moving on to the next project, like, sometimes you don't have to. I feel like you shouldn't feel the pressure that you immediately have to have a plan for what's next. And sometimes just creating some breathing room or some space or having a break is what's best. Like, even though this is something we do, we love, it's very cool that we get to create as like one of the driving forces of our lives, but it doesn't have to be the only thing in our lives. And so I think that as I progress too, like, I'm very consciously trying to find that balance of what works for me personally in terms of how much I have on the go, how much I'm committing to, and what I'm working on. And so we've had numerous conversations, just check-ins, like, do we want to push ahead with this idea or this concept now? How does it feel? And you just, like, you feel the decisions, and like one feels like that's the right fit for that moment, when you're discussing them. So
yeah, like the temperature, taking is really important. Going all the way back to that question of, like, you're managing your resource of, like, just your own energy and time too. And, I am not the only director that Kristyn works with. So, like, there's also that factor of, like, you've got other projects on the go. So sometimes you're moving into production on something which, like, pushes me to take a break or to focus on, like, writing rather than focusing on applications or focusing on getting into production on something. whatever the case may be. So there's just like a natural kind of ebb and flow, I think, that happens. And I have to say, like, my background as a filmmaker, like, I made a lot of films. When I graduated film school, I made a lot of films, like, very quickly, very, very low budget. And like, I basically just made them to make films, like, to practice my craft. And I didn't really work that hard to show them or sell them or any of that kind of stuff. And that was the time when I was producing all my own stuff. Like, I was just trying to get a lot of things made quickly and really just be better, essentially. And so I don't have a ton of experience with distributing shorts because of that, because I didn't really make it a priority. Like, my priority in that time was the production part. It was like getting really confident on set, comfortable, understanding how to translate, you know, words to the screen, you know, in a really effective and efficient way, and working with very little, working with small crews, and like just practicing all those skills. So that is a piece that I think I've relied more on you for the insights into that, because it's just not in my wheelhouse so much. But I feel like I'm learning more, just watching you distribute other shorts that you have produced, and seeing how that process goes is like made me realize like what the potential is for future projects or future shorts, and where those things could have, like you said, not die at the end of festivaling, but like have another life, you know, even if it's just like sitting somewhere where people can access it, but not, you know, just hiding in a hard drive somewhere, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just before we close up, I'd love to just share a couple of stories here. Mike, tell us a story about the trucks.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of have to tell this one.
I put a space for it.
So this was on the third day of Hatha. We were shooting 3 days, so day 3 of 3. It was winding down. We had gotten through sort of our most complicated work at this point, so I was starting to like, you know, I was starting to be comfortable. Like, I wasn't on, like, we got through some stunt work and stuff like that. That was really crucial the day before. So this was supposed to be a quote unquote straightforward day. But what happened is we had gotten a permit to basically remove parking from one side of the street so we could shoot across the street and have a clean shot, right? And I was thinking, I was driving to set and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a great day, like early day, like pretty, like one scene we're shooting. I get there and there's 2 giant vans parked in the one spot, like the rest of the street clear, but 2 giant vans parked in the one spot. I'm like, of course. So you'd think it would be a simple thing to take care of. I'm like, okay, I'll just call a tow company and have them tow the trucks. Turns out that those trucks were parked there before the signage, like they parked just before the permit signage went up, so nobody would tow them because it was technically a loophole. So they were like, the city was like, oh, it's not their fault. Like, they parked there before, like, we put up the signs, we can't really force, like, we can't really tow them because, so nobody was giving me solutions, which was, you know, really helpful. So we started like calling, like ringing all the buzzers in the apartment buildings, like, are these your vans? Are these your vans? Like, trying everything. And, you know, we had to, you know, our day was underway when this was happening. So we had to shoot around this, you know, find creative ways to shoot around this, but we still needed to get a wide shot somehow to complete this sequence, which was looking less and less possible as the day went on. Long story short, found a tow company that didn't care much about city bylaws, and I was like, great, I'll pay you cash, come now.
Oh, no.
And they just like, they didn't like, I think we did them a nicety, like we just towed them to another side of the street. We didn't like tow them away. And then the owners came by later and apologized, and it was all fine. So it all worked out, but it was like, you know, this was this took like 3/4 of the day to figure this out. So on the day that should have been the most straightforward, it somehow became the most complicated, but that's just the way it goes sometimes.
That's fair. Now you dropped this in, and I don't know if you intended it to be heard, but you dropped the RV keys in the lake.
Okay, I didn't drop the RV.
What's this story?
Easy with do you want to tell this one, Asia, or should I?
You can tell the story.
So yeah, this was day, I think, 2 or 3 of 5 of Nahaiku. We were shooting in the Okanagan in Peachland during the heat dome, may I add. So we're coming up on what was a relatively difficult day up to this point. Like, it was just a long day outside all day in the heat. We were filming with our young actors on bikes and stuff like that. So there were stunts and complicated camera work involved. And then, as most producers and directors know, these were UBCP actors, so we were running a clock with them. They had a shorter day. And so we ended up like skating by. We got it all done, but then we had an RV that was for cast holding, and the keys disappeared. And we couldn't find them. We couldn't find them anywhere. Theory was that they went in the lake. So like a bunch of us just like rolled up our shorts and started like wading through like the water. There's people, like Peachland people in the lake, that are like, "What are you doing?" And we're like, "We're looking for keys." And they're like, "Okay, we'll help." So you've got like 20 people looking for like a little black key that looks like every rock in the goddamn lake. So, and it was getting to the point where we were going to call a locksmith, and they were on our way. And then I think in that time we found the key.
Was the key in the lake, or the key was in somebody's pocket?
I'm not going to comment on that.
That's an answer.
No, if the key was in somebody's pocket.
Of course. Was it your pocket?
It was not my pocket. I'm not going to say more than that. But I mean, this was a scenario though of not telling Asia at the time about
Yeah.
This was a scenario of withholding information until I had the solution. Like, I took her back, like she went back to the house and she's like, "Where are you guys?" And I'm like, "Oh, just dealing with something. I'll be right there." So, told her afterwards, but that was a scenario of when to choose your battles accordingly, right?
How long did this process last? How long between the lock being discovered locked to the finding of the key?
I want to say probably somewhere between an hour to an hour and a half.
That is not as bad as I expected.
Yeah, like it could have been far worse, right? And like at least it was the end of the day. Like everybody was packing up and going home. Like we weren't in the middle of like a unit move or something like that. Like it could have been far worse. It was just, I think the hardest part, it was just at the end of a particularly exhausting day out in heat dome heat, that it was just like, oh, now we have to search for this key.
Fair enough. Melanie and Kristyn, do you have a story you'd love to share about a project? And a catastrophe or just a pleasant story would be fine.
Well, we shot this summer just one day Switchback teaser to show when we were pitching it. And the cool thing about that is that we got a wolf. So we had a wolf dog, and it was a good test too of like what it was like to work with an animal on set. So same thing, it was during one of our little heat waves. It wasn't quite the heat dome, but it was a particularly hot day. We were out in a forested area. We have 2 dogs, one a wolf dog, and there was stinging nettle.
Yes.
And we knew that there was stinging nettle in the area, and we were trying to warn everyone, but even despite our best efforts of trying to keep people away, some people got stinging nettle. So that was good kind of test of those circumstances, I think.
Yeah, and when I had scouted the location, I had got a really bad. I had fallen and grabbed a branch of stinging nettle and got like a stinging nettle right through my hand. Ooh. And so I was like really cautious when we were shooting because I had already been literally burned. But yeah, it was really eye-opening. Like I highly recommend this. You said this earlier, Asia, that like sometimes the short can be a really great like test run in a way, or proof of concept for a feature, but it can also, even as a shoot, it can be a good test run for some of the things that might come up in the feature. And like in this case, the feature has a wolf as like a major character. After that experience, I have some thoughts about how much wolf will stay in the script.
Cutting all the wolf out
really
of the script.
Difficult to shoot with them, and a lot of things we didn't really know. I think I certainly thought it was going to be more like a trained dog, but there are all kinds of limitations that we weren't aware of. For example, they can never be unleashed. They always have to have a leash. So you have to budget into your VFX to remove that. And we just didn't know that that was like one of those limitations that was really critical to like think about. And so, you know, it was really valuable for the ultimate, you know, project, like when we shoot the feature, that, okay, that's going to have to be like a consideration, basically. So yeah, it was a summer, you know, mosquitoes and stinging nettle and heat and all, you know, putting everybody through all that stuff. But I think everybody, because of the wolf, everybody was like, sign me up, because, you know, with an animal is very exciting, I think, for lots of people.
Moral of the story here is suffer for your art.
Yeah. Yes.
So just before we wrap up, I'd love for all of you to share, you know, what you've got coming down the pipeline, where people can find you if they're looking for you, and if you got like a message to people who are watching, or you know, emerging filmmakers and the like. I'm gonna start with Melanie and Kristyn, and then we'll move on to Mike and Asia.
Sure. Well, I have a feature film that is in the middle of its festival run called Golden Delicious, directed by Jason Carmen, who will be on the festival distribution strategy panel tomorrow. And so we are in the middle of our festival run, and I think you can go to our Facebook page or website to see upcoming screenings, and we expect that it will be available to the public in some format kind of in the spring, summer. And then we're actively working on development, most notably Switchback. So hopefully you could see more updates on that. And the way you can find me primarily is through email, because I am a nerd and not on a lot of stuff, but Instagram as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Switchback is like our biggest sort of project in development at the moment, but it's, as with features, it can be very slow. So we had like a very exciting summer with going to Frontiers, but right now we're kind of back into a lull of more like back into the script and working on notes and things. But I also am working on a script, Canada Council funded script that, you know, hopefully I'll take it into production at some point, which is a like experimental sort of sci-fi related topic called Astronomical Bodies. And so I mostly post any kind of like filmy news to my Instagram, which is at Director Melanie. And yeah, hopefully I'll have news to share about those things as we go along. But right now we're kind of in a lull. It's just like, I'm just deep into writing.
Thank you. Asia and Mike, where can we find you? What do you have coming down the pipeline?
Do you want to go, Asia?
Sure. So yeah, I have multiple projects that I'm working on. Some of them are with Mike, some of them aren't with Mike. But right now I'm in post-production on 2 feature films. One of them is a feature documentary that Mike's a co-producer on, which I'm co-directing with Kat Jamie, who's another local filmmaker. And then I also have 3 television series in development. And then Mike and I recently got development funding for our next short film. And then we're also in early development for our feature that we're taking to Berlin. And I guess in terms of like finding me, it's just like Instagram, you know, website, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And like our short film Nahaiku is continuing the festival circuit this spring. It's I think for the time being it's kind of more focused on the US side. So it's going to be playing in some markets in Utah and Los Angeles and a few sites there, as well as internationally. And then, you know, for other projects, I had like my first 2 features, The Beehive and Wild Goat Surf. They will be released this spring. They'll start their festival. They'll start the festival runs in the fall, and then will be released shortly after that, I should say. And then I'm going into production on my 3rd feature called The Star Beside the Moon, which is written and directed by Andy Alvarez, who's a director I think most people are familiar with in this community. And we're going into production in the fall for that one. So that'll be a big one. We're going to be shooting here in Canada, and then also doing a second unit in Bogota, Colombia as well. So that'll be quite an experience, quite an undertaking. And then, like Asia mentioned, we're in development for a feature film, which we're going to be taking to the European film market this year, which is very exciting. So in terms of where to find me, Facebook, Instagram. My website is my company website, studio104entertainment.com. You can find us there. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for joining us on this panel and being part of this. I really enjoyed the discussions that we had, and I look forward to seeing all of your work coming down the pipeline in the future.
Always a pleasure to share space with Asia and Mike, and big thank you to Abby for hosting and moderating. And I know all the people behind the scenes at Vancouver Short Film Festival, but notably Andrea deserves a little shout out for all the hard work she puts in behind it, and Emily and Nick, obviously, of course, as well.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
So again, I just want to thank all our panelists for joining us. I want to thank our festival co-directors, our board for this whole event, and Creative BC for sponsoring this panel series, as well as all our other festival sponsors for their continued support. I want to remind everybody that this and the other panels in this series will be available to stream on YouTube on our channel at any point in time after this panel has been completed or any of the other ones have been completed. You're welcome to join us for our Craft of Editing panel following this one, as well as tomorrow for the Planning Your Festival Strategy panel. Following that panel on Sunday, there's going to be a Keep It Short speed meeting, which you're welcome to sign up for through Eventbrite. We hope to see you there. A reminder to please fill out the survey following this event. We really appreciate your feedback, and your answers help us put together future panel series. Another reminder that our submissions close on February the 10th. So please, if you have a film you'd like to submit for this year's VSFF, please submit it as soon as possible. We're happy to see as much of your work as you guys present us. From everyone here at VSFF, thank you for joining us, and bye.